this matters very much on many levels. For example, if we have a scale here, if you are a very small living organism, like a bacterium, communication matters too. I will discuss that shortly. Somewhere on a higher level, what do we have? Something more complex than this. Could you give some examples?
Hydra.
Hydra. So let's say that somewhere here we have human. The timeline is not to scale.
And aliens later.
Actually, so we have very small things. Here we have average size things. Then if you have a bunch of humans, you have some sort of a community, like a city or a village. So you have a community. And let's say that at some point, this community grows and grows, and you have the whole planet is covered in one big city. And obviously at that point, the civilization is prepared to colonize other planets. So you have some well, actually, at first it's intragalactic, because you have to first conquer the galaxy, and only then you can go to the intergalactic scene. So, why does communication matter? For example, if you are one of these little things, you could kill a human, right? One infection, and for some reason you start bleeding. You think one single bacterium cell can do that?
Well, no, it is probably no.
Someone says no. Why?
Sure. We usually talk, I'm not sure if I'm right, but we usually talk about bacteria as infecting, but actually there's many chances, and one of them usually infects you. It's not like one particular microorganism. There are many. Like if you get a flu, for example, it's not because there was one bacteria in the room somewhere. There were many, and you got one of them.
Okay, so you're right. It takes more than one.
About between bacteria.
Exactly. So if, let's say this is a human being, and we have N cells, somewhere here inside there is one of these. It's not able to actually kill you, not even make you sneeze. However, when you have more, when they somehow coordinate their activities, there should be some kind of a signal that says, okay, attack now. And when that signal is sent, then all of them begin producing some chemical which is bad for us, and then you actually die or suffer terribly. So the question is, how do they let each other know that now there are not just one of us, but N of us? This is, remember, this is a one-cell thingy. It doesn't have an antenna. It doesn't have any ears to listen to others talking. So obviously there has to be some form of communication between these individual cells. And remember that from the perspective of bacteria, of the bacterium, the human body is huge. It's like you have to be somewhere here in the bloodstream of my leg, and you must be able to interact with some other entity on this side of my body. From their perspective, it's far away. So that's one example of how communication matters, and they do solve this problem using chemicals. So every bacterium has some inner mechanism which produces a specific molecule that has a certain shape. So it releases them into the environment. And let's say that this shape, I'm going to represent it as a triangle. So on one hand, it has this producing mechanism. On the other, it also has a receptor, which has exactly that shape. So we can click in and that's it. So you start producing these, and when you're just on your own, then this thing fades away, floats away, and that's it. But when there are others like you around, other molecules of this kind will eventually plug in. So the bacteria interact with each other by using this. So when this happens, they know that now we have more than the necessary minimum to begin the attack. So this is one example. If you go to a personal scale, in the case of a human, so historically, why do you think humans are the most deadly animal on this planet?
Because they can communicate.
Because they can communicate with each other. But
Better than any other animal.
Gather together to kill something.
No, it's most likely because they're the smartest.
the smartest. Why do you think humans are the smartest?
Well, because there is no another animal on this planet that okay, they can kill a human, but if humans are all very well organized, they can achieve almost everything. I mean, no animal on this planet can achieve what a human does.
Or a group of humans.
A group of humans, yes.
Because if you take one human specifically,
Yes, one is not able to do so much, but
exactly. So if you take one modern Homo sapiens and put them into a rainforest, they will most likely die very fast. Because there are frogs that have this slimy mucus on their skin. If you touch it in a couple of hours, hasta la vista, baby. Well, there are other frogs in the Amazonian rainforest, which the natives use as a drug. So they have this tradition, you find the right type of frog and you lick it, and in a few moments you will be on a trip. So those are also interesting frogs. But anyway, let's go back to humans. On an individual scale, we are, of course, intelligent, capable of many things, but it takes a group of people to actually get something done, to send a shuttle into space, to dig a very deep hole and extract some oil out of it, or to make a video camera such as the one which is recording this message right now. And even if you take a very simple thing like, for example, this piece of chalk I'm holding right now. Is anyone in this class able to produce one of these individually without external assistance?
no.
So think about it. This culture chote thingy is the result of the decomposition of animals that died millions of years ago and fell to the bottom of the ocean. And then there was geological activity which moved continents around, and this is somewhere in a deep sediment. So you have to somehow, first of all, dig it out, or you have to explore the area and find a place where this is exposed right at the surface. Then you have to break it into smaller pieces with what? A hammer? Who is going to make the hammer for you? Let's say you found a rock right there. So you can just hit it, it breaks apart, but of course you need to polish it to this nice cylindrical form because the other type of chalk, we don't have that here, but the one which is square, it's really not user-friendly. So the point is that even such a simple thing requires interaction between people. And back in the prehistoric times, every human was a person on their own. You made your own food, you made your own shelter, you made your own clothes, and you were really on your own. And only with communication as it developed as a feature, people could start to specialize. So I'm going to become a professional chalk maker. So I dedicate all my time to looking for the best sediments, and that time is not invested into hunting, making food, or building houses. So I must make a deal with someone and say, okay, let's break apart the responsibilities. You are a very good fisher. I'm going to take your fish and eat it, and I'm going to give you my chalk because I'm a very good chalk maker, for example. So communication on a personal scale allowed us to gather into communities, which then could do more stuff. As a community, we could perhaps establish a trading route through the desert. No single person could do that, but if, as a group of people, when you delegate different sub-problems to everybody, you can achieve more complex things. Now, when we, at some point, cover this whole planet and we then take another one, because we can, how shall we communicate between those planets? Using what?
Well, it depends.
Well, it depends on what.
It depends on what technologies are there, but still you can try send radio waves for them. Why not? Or light emitting stuff, or laser. It depends on what you'll be able to reproduce later on.
Just keep in mind that, let's say if this is us, and somewhere here is Mars, the delta between them, how long it takes for light to get there is some number of minutes. So it's not going to be instant messaging, or immediate messaging, as we
You
discussed.
won't be able to talk on Skype like live.
Perhaps, yeah, you could first record a message and then send it and then get back a response. Or,
Well, for such big distances, we have to find something different that will take less time to transfer the message and will avoid any noises and any other interference from the outside world.
you're right.
We have to maintain the signal through this such long distances.
Yes, but even the light, like you said, needs some means to pass this distance. So since we know right now that there is no possible thing that can make a bigger speed than the speed of light, there is nothing that could do this, I think.
Well, people are working on quantum mechanics and different theories.
There is such a photon light, I think,
Photon duality.
or something like this that you apply some force on a photon here, somewhere another one.
Entanglement. It's
Yeah,
what here is.
Entanglement.
So, on one hand, you have laws of physics that say nothing can go faster than light. And on the other hand, there is this relatively new field, quantum physics, which explores some really interesting occurrences in the universe. And one of them is entanglement, which practically allows you to have two particles which are locked together, but they can be physically separated. So if you change something here, the same change occurs on the other end. And these things can be very, very far away. So effectively, this change propagates faster than light. So maybe this would be a good choice for intragalactic and intergalactic communications. Has anyone read the book Ender's Game?
Yes.
Or you could at least have seen the film.
Yeah.
And you probably know that there were these aliens who were in a merged mind. So they had multiple individuals, but they were actually in the same mental state. And whatever happened here was perceived by everybody else simultaneously, even if they were far away. So that's science fiction, but who knows? One day, in the future, maybe it could be turned into some device that actually works. So my point is that, first of all, communication matters. And it doesn't necessarily matter only for computer engineers. So if you study biology, you might be interested in figuring out how these molecules are formed, then maybe you could make something which blocks this receptor such that even though there are many bacteria in your body, they all think that they are on their own. So then there would be no disease. That's one example. And there's one more thing on a human personal scale. Communication is about sharing your thoughts with other people. So if this is me, I have some thoughts. And let's say these are all of you. I have to make sure that these thoughts are transferred into your conscience without distortions. Because if there are errors in perception, you and I will have a problem at the end of the semester. I'll give you an exam and you'll write some mumbo jumbo that doesn't make sense, or maybe it makes sense to you but it doesn't make sense to me because your idea is not the same idea as I had when I gave it to you. But because this communication wasn't actually optimized, then for some reason there were differences between this and that. And I'm going to talk about that in more detail once I clear this space. And by the way, I have to remind you that you can ask questions anytime. And it's a very good idea to ask questions. Because if you don't, you won't know the answer. So I am now going to represent a very basic that illustrates pretty much any communication system you could possibly think of. So in very rough terms, there is a sender and there is a receiver. The sender has a message which has to be delivered to the recipient. The sender takes that message and using an encoder transforms it into a signal. So the message becomes a signal. The signal is then sent through a channel. It is received by a decoder. The decoder decodes the signal and obtains the message. And there is also noise, which is some external influence that can add some negative changes to the signal that is flowing through the channel. So, in our example, I am the sender. The messages are my ideas. The channel is the atmosphere in this room, the air through which air waves flow. The decoder is, let's say, it's your ear. It receives a a sound wave, which is then decoded into words, and words are passed back to your brain, and at some point you have this message. However, I'm going to call it message prime, which is not the same as just message, because, well, why? Why do you think I did it this way?
There is noise that changes the message while moving from the encoder to the decoder, so that the input for the decoder is different, that is the output of encoder. So you cannot switch it back to the first initial message.
Okay, got it. What do you think?
Well, at every step, at every transformation from the sender to the encoder, from the encoder to decoder, from the decoder to the receiver, there may be errors or differences. For example, the sender may encode its message in one kind of thing, and the decoder thinks that it should decode it in another way. So the same words can mean different things to people, if we talk about people.
It makes sense.
That's why the message perceived by the receiver may often be very different from what the sender
Actually intended.
yeah.
And how can you ensure that message really is equal to message prime? Is there something we can do? Paul,
Yes.
what can we do to make sure that m is the same as m prime?
We have if we have like a hash.
You mean hashish, cocaine?
No, like I said, if we have some kind of value that using an algorithm, we know that this message converts to this value, we can first send this value, and then when the message is done, we can confirm from both sides that it's the same.
Okay, but you're making this more complicated than it should be. Think about communication between you and that. Am I supposed to send you a hash every time I say a word?
No,
What do people do? What do you think? When there is some communication issue.
I think there is no way that you can find out we understand each other, because every time you say to me something, I always know that I am right and you think that you are right. So,
Or you can just ask to make sure that the message is the same.
Okay, I've got some candidate answers here. Go ahead.
I think we can just send the message twice.
So you can send it twice.
It's not 100%, but
Okay, but it works sometimes.
Well, in Russian there is a saying, before you argue, договоритесь о терминах перед тем, как спорить. So what I mean is that the sender and the receiver should agree on the meaning of message, of the words that they use in communication. Basically, they have to agree on a protocol.
Okay. What else?
send the message back and receive a confirmation if it's the same.
Send back
Acknowledge.
and acknowledgement. So asynchronous, but this doesn't solve the problem, right? Because I am so far writing what you say, I'm not necessarily writing correct answers.
Okay.
But why does it not solve the problem?
I think it doesn't, because how does the receiver know that he received something okay? How does he know it's
Yeah.
about?
So I could give you an example. When a teacher says, "Is everything clear?" Everybody says, "Yay!" Or when the teacher says, "Do you have any questions?" And there is silence. And the silence sort of acknowledges that there are no questions, meaning and implying that everything was understood.
or nothing understood.
Or nothing was understood. But in practice, I know that people usually are afraid to ask questions or say that they didn't understand something. I was such a person myself throughout pretty much my entire school lifetime, which is why I suck at mathematics big time. And it's quite late to do anything about it, or maybe not, but I learned my lesson, and at some point I became a person who knows how to ask questions and is not afraid to ask questions. And I recommend you to be such a person. What else can we do?
In order to ensure an efficient communication, we have to choose a channel communication channel that will reduce the possible outside noise.
Okay. Now let me provide examples about everything you just said and add a few more things. So the first one is to send a message twice. If you didn't hear me, I can say that again, and most likely you will hear me better this time. Or I can resend my message 3 times, or I can send my message 3 times. You know, there is nothing in the universe that prevents me from sending it twice. So is it clear why resending the message works? However, sometimes, for example, let's focus on the last item. Choose a better channel. In this case, we're talking right now. The channel is the atmosphere. And you probably heard about in space, no one can hear you scream. Because in space, there is no atmosphere. There is nothing the sound waves can propagate through. So if we were in a vacuum, you would just see. So in that case, we should perhaps choose some other form of communication, another channel. You could rely on visual stuff. I could perhaps blink a light, and light propagates through vacuum without a problem. I could use some radio waves, which don't need any atmosphere. So that's how you choose a channel. Another example is if we were underwater. How do you think fish talk to each other?
By sounds, actually, they could.
They use gestures, one idea, and sound.
Sound, yes.
Sound underwater.
There's no sound.
Well,
You're
I
saying
don't know.
there's
Actually, there is sound, and
High
in fact,
frequency sound.
well, it depends. For example, did you know that we are responsible for a very big problem that whales deal with? Ballena. They use low frequency wavelengths to communicate, and they can talk over distances which are hundreds and maybe thousands of kilometers. So I am on one end of the ocean, somebody else is on the other side, and we can interact. The problem is that cargo ships and their engines make noises which are in the same frequency range, pretty much. So they cannot really hear each other any longer. So yes, if you are submerged in water, you can use sound, as long as you rely on the right frequencies so they can propagate far enough. So this is why choosing a channel also is an important aspect, and you need to know which features different channels provide, so you can choose the right tool to do the job right. And maybe, well, yeah, you got it. Send back an acknowledgement. So every time I send you a message, I'm going to ask you to somehow confirm that you have it. And you could do this either by saying, yes, I got it, or you could send me back the same message. So when I receive it, I can make sure it's the same thing that I sent you. Of course, this will sometimes fail.
In case it's not, you can resend the message.
Yeah, I can resend it if it's not the same. When is it not going to be effective?
When resending the message, or
Yeah, resending the message.
when the channel is broken,
So when there is,
no communication at all.
yeah, let's say we talk over a wire and someone snipped the wire. Got it, so no communication. And you had something else in mind?
Yes, if the message is too big or the amount of information is too big, it's not okay to resend the message.
Yeah, it makes sense. So imagine that we have this class, which lasts an hour and 20 minutes. And at the end of the class, I'm going to ask each of you to tell me back the same thing I told you bit by bit. It's going to be pretty complicated.
And if the delta t is pretty much too big in order to resend the message. I mean, when you don't have time to receive it again, you have to use the information that you have decoded. Right?
So if I understand you correctly, the more time passes between the moment I transmitted the message and the moment you give it back to me, the more decay occurs in your memory, so you really
No, I mean,
forget something?
for example, if you receive a message that you have to use it in some calculations, and resending that message will fail the calculations that, I mean, the calculations depend on time.
So sometimes you don't have the
Sometimes you
time.
don't have to
for that.
resend, you just have to use what you get.
Okay. The other thing here was agree on a protocol. Obviously, if I were speaking Chinese, maybe this wouldn't work. Or maybe you could rely on something else. You could rely on redundancy. So another thing that I could add to this list is use some backup channel. And let me explain what I mean by this. A few minutes ago, I told you a lie. I told you that I am using sound waves as a signal and the atmosphere as a channel. But is there something else I'm doing?
A drawing on the blackboard.
Okay, so I use that as another channel. I also use gestures. I move around and my facial expressions change. And based on that, you know whether I'm angry, whether I'm user-friendly, or if I'm confused, etc. So if you speak to a person who speaks only Chinese, maybe you won't understand them very, very specifically, but you will have a pretty clear idea if they want to kick your ass, or if they want to help you, or if they really don't care, right? Because we don't use just one method of communication. We use a bunch of them. So if one fails, you can extract some meaning from one of the other channels that are available. Am I making sense? So when I ask you whether I'm making sense, I am expecting you to send me back some sort of an acknowledgement. And another thing I can do is I can generate a question based on what I just told you, twist things slightly, and then based on your answer, I can figure out if you got it right or not. So whenever you say you have no question, everything makes sense, it also implies that I can ask any question about anything I just told you, and any person in this room will be able to provide a decent answer. Right? Let's test it. If you were a tree, what kind of a channel would you use to talk to other trees?
Roots.
Roots? Be more specific. Why?
Well, using roots, you can extract information from the medium and from the environment that you are, and that could, I don't know, communicate. Could be a channel to communicate between two trees at the
So
short distance.
The
for
roots
example.
would have to be interconnected somehow.
At the short distance, and through air or
Well,
through air
Actually, let me tell you a short story. So there are some trees. I don't remember exactly which ones. I think it's the acacia. So when there is a giraffe or some animal eating it, it begins to produce some sort of molecule which floats into space and warns the other trees
So that they can
that
run.
they can begin secreting some sort of thing that giraffes don't really like. Yeah. So if one tree gets attacked, it begins to be eaten by a giraffe. It produces some molecule which is then dissipated into the air. Neighbors of this tree receive that molecule and they begin producing some substance which giraffes don't like. And this is how trees communicate. Let me ask another test question to see if we can move on. If you were a person living on an isolated island with a few other people living on the same island, how would you interact? Those people can be on different parts of the island, of course.
By setting the fire and the smoke will go in the air and they will see my signal.
Okay, smoke signals. So in this case, what is the signal and what is the channel?
The air is the channel.
Mhm.
The signal is by visual.
Mhm.
I can see.
So if you see something, it means that a photon, let's say you see this blackboard or this gray board. So a photon hit it, bounced back, and ended up on your eye. So the photon, in this case, is the signal carrier. And it can propagate, you can see light even without an atmosphere. So just space itself is the channel. And, you know, in this list, you can add a few more items. So one of them is to increase the power of the signal. Let's say if you were noisy, I could talk a little bit louder just to make sure everybody hears what I say. That's an example of increasing the power of a signal. The problem with this is that it consumes more power. I cannot talk like this for very long periods of time, I'm not used to that. But it's a feature, it's an option we can rely on. Yeah?
But on the isolated island, we can use loud instruments.
Yeah, some tribes use whistles to talk to each other.
Yeah.
So, one more item here is increase the power of the signal. But of course, it uses more power, so sometimes if you're running out of battery juice, it may not be the best option. You can also use a channel that is specifically dedicated to this person, so to the recipient. For example, I could do this. And I didn't have to use a lot of power to send that signal, but I really had to get close to my recipient. Sometimes that's a good option. And let me tell you, does everybody here speak Russian?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there someone who does not speak Russian?
No.
Okay, just testing. So there is this joke about, you know, chucha. The jokes about that. So one of them got lost in the taiga. And after some weeks, he was found by his teammates. And they were asking him, so why didn't you try to fire in in the sky so we could hear you and then find you where you were. And he said, well, I shot all the arrows I had and no one heard me. So in that case, he was relying on sound as a method of getting the message across, and it didn't really work. But why did I ask you whether you speak Russian or not?
To make sure that you can tell the history in Russian.
But I
And
didn't
anybody
do this in Russian.
Anybody can.
Well, if you know Russian, you know jokes about choo-choo.
Okay, so we can just, next time I can tell you that specific joke about this character, and you know what I'm talking about. And that's about agreeing on a protocol. And there's another joke about that. So there was this club of jokers, and they knew each other so well, and they had this stand-up comedy act. One person in the audience would walk up in front of the room on the stage and would tell a joke. Everybody would laugh. And at some point, everybody knows all the jokes. And they thought that we could save some time by not telling you the actual joke, but by using a number for every joke. So you come in front and you say 5. And everybody said, joke number 5, you're funny. So one day, there is this club event. One person comes to the front of the stage and says, 157. And everybody laughs. You know, it's a disaster. People just can't keep a straight face. Their bellies hurt. Then they say 599. And then again, everybody is falling apart. You know, people are rolling over. It's really, the atmosphere is so exciting. And then he says 15. Everybody is silent except one person who is screaming and crying, and their face is so red, they're so laughing so much. And people turn to him and say, why are you laughing? It's such an old joke. Yeah, but I only heard it the first time. So in this case, they have agreed on a protocol. There was a convention that every number is mapped to a special joke. When you hear a number, you look up the text that corresponds to that number, you interpret it, and you laugh. So that's an example of agreeing on a protocol. Yes, it's something that helps. Let's talk about noise. Noise, what could it be? What do you think?
Noise is some distortion in the air, so it's not referred to the signal sent, so some other signals.
So other signals that, let me write the word. So this is the channel.
So from the other sender.
So the other sender, you mean the receiver?
No. The noise are produced by another senders, we could say.
Mm-hmm.
The noise is basically signals that the receiver receives, but the sender did not intend to send.
Mm-hmm. So I could perhaps restate that as noise is any external unwanted influence on the signal as it flows through the channel. The first and very simple example of noise is, well, what month is it right now? Blah, blah, blah. Did you hear his answer?
Yes.
February.
Well, some of you did, some of you didn't, because I made some noise. And you know, it's a trap. When people, when talking about communications, when you hear the word noise, you think about sound. But there can be other flavors of noise. Sound is just one of them. So, what examples of noise could you provide?
If we communicate by internet, if some troubles, I mean,
The sun?
no. for example, by Skype, and some noise appear in the background. I mean,
You mean audible noise?
Packages are not
automobiles
transmitted
or sweet.
So basically, a car driving by
Yeah.
while I'm talking is a source of noise.
Yeah.
So we got that one. What else?
I would say that there can be noise like white noise, that is just ambient noise that can be filtered out, and there can be noise that is like two radios on the same station, on the same frequency, yeah. But you want to listen only to one station. So the second one is kind of noise for you. That interferes with the necessary.
So you could have electromagnetic noise. Let me write it down. So depending on the channel we use, so let's say right now I wouldn't be talking and you could only see my text. And if I went to the lights and began doing this, and maybe I could turn on a bright flashlight, so bright like the one you used to call Batman. If I kept flashing it and using different colors, would you be able to perceive this properly? Perhaps not, maybe yes. So it wouldn't be as user-friendly as it is right now. So that would be a source of noise, which in this case we perceive as light. If a lightning strikes, and or if the wind blows, and you probably noticed sometimes when the lights go slightly dimmer and then they go brighter, and so that can be a side effect of some natural phenomena occurring in the universe. Sunbursts. You know, the sun is a very big entity, and each time it does somewhere in some hemisphere of this planet, the lights go off, Skype doesn't work, pictures of cats are not delivered. It's a disaster. So there is still more stuff we can do. We can protect the channel. For example, if we use a wire, we could wrap it in something that protects it from external, let's say, at least electromagnetic sources of noise. So I could wrap it into something like a TV cable. I suspect all of us have, at least once in their life, held a TV cable. It's, if you look at it from a side, it has a wire in the center, then there is some plastic around it, then there is this and more plastic around it. So basically, it's called shielding. You wrap it into some tin foil, for example, and that tin foil protects you from some things. In that case, it's a little bit more expensive because you don't have just a piece of metal, you also have to have some plastic around it. It's more expensive to produce, it's heavier, it takes more space, so there are some drawbacks. But sometimes that's the price you have to pay for making sure it actually works. And if there is something else, I might remember it and then update the list accordingly. So up to now, we spoke about different channels, signals, different sources of noise. So this is not a source, it's just a type of noise. Let's talk about sources. It could be the wind, it could be the sun, it could be other people.
noise. If the receiver doesn't want to receive
It doesn't want
propagation.
that. Yeah, so you could, in the definition of noise, you could use the keyword undesirable or unwanted. An unwanted influence on your signal while you try to communicate. So at some point, what I asked what wanted was, I said, "Brother," and that was noise. But what if we had a competition on who makes the funniest sound? And in that case, that would be a message, because I generated something that I wanted you to hear exactly that way.
Yes, but if all of us will generate that sound at the same moment of time, that will be a noise.
Yeah, which is why in this competition we will agree that we make the recordings individually. We publish them on SoundCloud, Mixcloud, YouTube, in HD, stereo, and only then people will listen.
Yeah, but in the case when all the people are doing this, and and there is no receiver, there is no noise, because no one listens, and there is nothing to interfere with.
Yes, but this is a competition. They have to find out which of the noise is the best one, the most interesting.
The noisiest.
Yes.
And yes, record that in order to publish on YouTube, so there is a receiver.
Well, actually, I thank you for bringing that up. Let's look at it from a slightly different perspective. So, according to what we were just discussing, the definition of noise implies the point of view of the receiver. So if there is no receiver, then it doesn't really matter.
Like messages to aliens.
And that's exactly what I thought of. So, has anyone heard about a person whose name is Carl Sagan?
Yes.
Well, we have 3 non-negative answers. You may have watched a film called Contact. And do you remember what it shows us in the beginning? It shows us some video recordings of Hitler. Anyone, someone? So let's imagine this thing as a planet. Every time we broadcast some music or some video show, these sound waves, these electromagnetic waves, which we use as a signal carrier, once they are, let's say, received here, they keep going in all directions, and they flow into space. And these waves travel with a certain speed. So if I am somewhere really far away, let's say here, then at some point they will reach me. And if I use some sort of decoder, if I receive something, at some point this message will reach me. So that's where alien civilizations come into the picture. Hypothetically, some society living far away will eventually be able to hear, if they listen, they will be able to hear all these electromagnetic waves that we broadcasted into space. So, first of all, they will know we are here. They might like what they see, and maybe they will have some. Yeah, maybe they will have some questions. Does anyone watch Futurama? Only one person?
Well, we've seen Futurama.
Well, you know about the aliens living on Omicron Persei 9, who were watching a TV show on which was filmed here, and they watched it somewhere there. And at some point, these people here, they didn't get paid, so they just decided to stop the filming. And these people here got angry because they wanted to see what would happen next. So they came with their spaceships and invaded the planet so they could make humans continue filming the series. And you could also apply the same concept to space research. So every time you point your telescope to a star, you see it not as it is right now, but you see it as it was at the time that light, so light travels. By the time this thing hits our lens, the star itself might be gone, which is exactly what Mikhail Nescu wrote in Last Hour. Do you remember this poem? He says, care răsărit o cale atât de lungă, că mii de ani au trebuit luminii ca să vină. Yeah.
Plus that there is the Doppler effect. When the, for example, a moving object emits some sounds, and they will perceive them differently because it's moving at the wavelength far.
Yes, it's shifted either to the right end of the spectrum or the other one. So you could see whether it's coming towards you or going away.
Yeah.
And we use that as a radar to see if a car is going too fast. Let's focus on encoders and decoders. Up to this point, we had a quite simplistic view of such communication systems. And since we began talking about poetry, let me ask you about this feeling of comentarii literare la lecții de limbă și literatură română. Am I the only person here who had some contradictions with teachers with respect to what the poet really meant when he wrote that, or when she wrote that?
Kind of embarrassment.
So, the teacher always knows best, of course. Let's give them the impression that that's the truth. So the problem is as follows. And this brings me back to the first version of this drawing, when you have a person with an idea, which is then encoded into words, and it's perceived by another person and interpreted as an idea, which sometimes can be the same thing, but sometimes it could be something completely different. And this doesn't only apply to poetry. Let's take music, for example. If I say Radiohead, what kind of feelings do you associate that with, if anyone does listen to Radiohead? Okay, if I say Moby, Moby. Does anyone here?
Leave me out, leave me out.
Okay, that's one song. So, I have to update
James Bond.
my music library. I mean, the examples I provide ring no bells to you, so it doesn't really work.
Well, we know those names.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, I'll include them in the exam, along with Fisherama, so you better prepare. So, can someone give me an example of sad songs? Just give me an artist and a track title. Let's see if we have some common ground here. Okay, someone does. Why didn't you say? Why didn't you raise your hand?
Because I don't know so many songs about.
Well, maybe neither do I, but I know that one. Switchfoot. Which one?
The Beautiful Letdown.
Does everybody agree that those are the kinds of feelings it produces? I asked initially, give me an example of a sad song.
Okay, Pink Floyd, Echoes.
So, Pink Floyd.
It's not sad.
See?
makes me sad.
And here we go.
Maybe more ever-loving, ever-loving.
It's a sad song. You know, in general, I would associate his music with some sad feelings, melancholic feelings. But different people see it differently. So we cannot necessarily agree whether that's what Moby really meant. Was he sad when he wrote that song? And in fact, in an interview, he was once asked, why do you keep writing sad songs? He says, I'm not a sad person, I just like that type of sound. So when you interpret, when you decode the signal, it's not just a matter of what they meant, but it's also a matter of your personal experience. If you had a lot of suffering in your life, if you were disappointed many times, you may see something as sad. Some other person could be an optimist, and whenever they stumble upon something, they see another new idea to think about, or they see this as a challenge that encourages them to try something new. Now, I once there is this show, a radio show. So there is a radio station in the UK, it's called Kerrang Radio, it's about rock music. So there was this song once, and I liked it. And the DJ then said it was described by a music critic as a song that gives me the feeling that everybody on the planet is high-fiving each other at the same time. So he described that song this way. And I'm going to tell you what the title is so you can have your own interpretation of that. But you don't do this right now, give it a go. So my next question for you is, whenever I pronounce a sentence, what is the encoder in my body?
The language, maybe.
The language, vocal cords.
Yeah.
So let me write that down. But first, I'm going to destroy this blank. Does everybody agree that the vocal cords are the encoder when I talk to you?
No,
Why do you disagree?
because I think a encoder is probably still your mind, but
Yes.
vocal cords is just what you use to just.
Well, it
The
is
encoder
still an encoder, but not the
The brain
brain.
is the encoder. So it encodes it in muscle
Transmit
movements.
center, right?
And
So shall I leave the word mind here or do I cross it out?
it's a key.
Okay.
Well, if we go so deep, everything from mind to the vocal cords are like hundreds of encoders. Like we have the neurons,
Transmitters.
transmitters and encoders. The mind encodes the message and sends it to the muscles. Muscles encode the air vibrations.
And yet between
Encoding
them
system.
there are other channels and there is communication between them also.
Maybe we could answer this question by asking another one. When I talk to you and you perceive my message, what is the decoder?
Also the brain.
Also the brain?
The auditive system.
So
You can talk without
Yeah. Actually, it's encoding and decoding system.
So your audio system. Has anyone seen a film called The Matrix?
Yes.
Has anyone not seen a film called The Matrix?
Oh.
Okay, I am asking for one person. I strongly recommend you to watch that film. Shall we spoil it for her or not?
No.
Well, in that case, if you remember, the machines found some way to connect to the person's brain directly. I'm not spoiling it, so you can still watch it. you could connect to the brain directly bypassing vocal cords, ears, ear canals, etc. And the mind inside the brain felt normally. So does it mean that if I can take the vocal cords out, it's still going to work out?
No, but if they put the brain out,
If you take the brain out, it's definitely not going to work. But did you know that the brain has a lot of different areas that are responsible for a lot of different things? For example, so let's take this thing and use a zoom in feature to see what's inside. So it's made out of different areas. And a lot of time ago, there was this field called phrenology. Did anyone hear about it? So one person. So this is about attempting to understand how a person behaves as a function of the shape of their skull. So for example, they would notice that people who are strong have a little bump on this side of the head. Because they tried 5 people, all 5 of them had this little bump here, so they thought, anyone who has a bump here has to be strong. So they would look for such correlations and then build this list of coincidences, which would reflect a person's character based on what their head looks like and where they have little dimps and pimples and so on. So that was one stage. But later, humanity began to disassemble, to analyze things in a different way. And first, the easiest way to do that is, of course, to manually take out some part of the brain, which would be unethical. So that's why people would have to rely on chance. For example, if someone had an accident and the part of their head was, damaged, something in the behavior of that person changes. So you could say, if this front side of the brain is missing, then this person cannot move their left hand. So you could say, there must be some correlation between this and this. And I could give you some examples. There are several conditions. For example, one of them is known as Broca's aphasia. So, Broca was the person doing the research, and he was rewarded with his name being attached to a bad thing that could happen to people. And there is another type of aphasia called Wernicke's aphasia. Again, a guy who was fortunate enough to have his name permanently associated with something bad. So I don't remember exactly which of them corresponds to what, but both of them are related to speech. So in one case, a person who has one type of aphasia can produce speech, but cannot understand speech. And in the other case, they can understand speech, but they cannot produce speech. At the same time, let's say the person who cannot interpret speech. If you show them the text in written form, they will be able to understand it properly. So in other words, I need more space here, so this goes away. If you break down speech into subcomponents, you will see that there are multiple transitions that have to occur for speech to happen. So it all begins with an idea you have in your mind, a thought. Then, this idea has to become a word. And then this word has to become a sound. This word can also become something else. It could become a visual representation, like something I'm writing down. So it could also be something visual. And it could also be something kinesthetic, related to motion. Why is it so? Maybe I'm just making things up.
Why is it so?
Well, why can't a word become motion and still be perceived accurately?
Like talking
Because we can encode it this way.
Yeah, do you know the game charades, pantomimes?
Yeah.
I'm really good at that game. So,
But what kind of motion? It's also visual actually. Like if I'm doing this, you perceive it as visual sound.
okay, so there are multiple flavors of visual.
Motion or kinesthetic, as you said, maybe like tapping or feeling musical or something. But
Okay, I understand what you're saying. So instead of visual, I should say perhaps graphical.
Well, even graphical, we can represent it as text, or we can represent it as a picture.
Yeah, so the point is that there are many ramifications here. I'm not implying that this is all there is. So you could have motion where someone uses their body as a way to convey a message. You could have graphics where someone uses visual symbols to transform that word into something others can read. It could also be a sound. Now, let's go to the next level. If it is a sound, then it's transformed into a series of electrical signals that stimulate my vocal cords and my tongue and the rest of my mouth in such a way that when I want to produce the sound, ah, you actually hear that sound. So this becomes instructions for vocal cords and mouth. If it's about graphics, it becomes another series of electrical signals that are then transformed into that are instructions for my hand and my fingers and my arm. So instructions for, let's say hand. And motion becomes instructions for the whole body when you play pantomimes.